Hi, my name is Carl Clark, and I'm an 8th grade science teacher at St. James Middle School here in Horry County, South Carolina. And this presentation will be analyzing online resources. As a veteran teacher, I've experienced students tell me constantly how unreliable Wikipedia sources are, and I generally, just encourage students to be skeptical of any source of information. But what I'd like to do in this presentation is put Wikipedia to the test. Let's compare Wikipedia to the information that's expected for 8th grade science students to learn according to the Department of Education and the South Carolina State Standards. The topic of this evaluation will focus on the rock cycle. I decided to investigate the rock cycle simply because the information about the rock cycle is supposedly scientifically sound and should be well established, and it may be a good indicator on how reliable some information in Wikipedia is compared to what the South Carolina state standards are. The rock cycle is an important part of the 8th grade science curriculum simply because students in 8th grade science are learning about big ideas in earth science. The rock cycle is an important element to the study of earth science because it demonstrates how things are constantly changing on the surface of the earth. As rocks undergo processes and become different kinds of rocks, it demonstrates how earth is constantly changing. I would also consider students understanding the rock cycle to be fundamentally important for somebody to be reasonably scientifically literate. I think it helps people understand how Earth is constantly changing and appreciate those changes. Alright, so my official source of information is directly from the South Carolina Department of Education and the support documents and the academic standards that I'm obligated to teach my students in 8th grade science. So how do I really know that this source is credible? Well, basically the fact that the state of South Carolina is mandating that these concepts be taught. They were approved by the Department of Education, and they require students to understand these concepts in order to move on to high school. So those are just some of the reasons why I would consider this official source to be credible. However, when I dove into the document and really tried to validate where this information come from, this statement here is the only thing that I could find in a massive document to validate the credibility of this source, which involves the State Department of Education, an oversight committee, and review committees. So I would consider this source to be official and credible just because I'm required to teach it as a teacher and students are required to learn it, and it was approved by the South Carolina Department of Education. Alright, let's discuss some strengths of Wikipedia. First of all, Wikipedia is completely free and provides easy access for anybody who has access to the internet, so that is a tremendous strength. Number two, Wikipedia is constantly updated in comparison to textbooks or even state standards that are only updated periodically at best. Wikipedia also provides a reasonable amount of background information about a topic, as well as keywords that could help you research more about your topic somewhere else. Wikipedia also provides sources for the articles. They're cited and hyperlinked in order for you to further investigate into a topic if necessary. And what we have here is a snapshot of the references that were included for the rock cycle on Wikipedia, which I would consider these 4 details to be reasonable strengths of Wikipedia. All right, let's discuss some weaknesses of Wikipedia. For me as a teacher, the main weakness for me, honestly, is just generally the amount of information that's provided on Wikipedia is just so substantial and not very engaging for students, and it requires a lot of work to just simplify it for students or to teach them the skills in order to decipher the information on Wikipedia pages, which I believe is a tremendous weakness, at least for me, on a teacher perspective. Number two, the information is definitely not written in a way that scaffolds the information to help students understand the information at all, whereas the standards kind of do. The main criticism of Wikipedia is generally that anybody can technically create, edit, or delete Wikipedia articles. Wikipedia articles also are not considered scholarly at all because we really don't know anything about the contributors and what their credentials actually are. Articles are generally works in progress, that they can constantly change, which could be considered a weakness if you're trying to definitively draw conclusions. And sometimes articles are even vandalized, and that could also be considered a great weakness for Wikipedia. So how do we know the trustworthiness of the sources cited in Wikipedia, and how do I know? Well, the simple answer is it's unknown. We really don't know. However, the sources are traceable. So here you can see the references that were supplied for the rock cycle. And if we needed to, we could really examine whether or not these references are indeed trustworthy or not. I also wanted to point out, some of the dates of these resources. So we have something going back to 1911, 96, 2000, and 2005. I would consider these, relatively old. However, that could just be a result of the topic rock cycle, which is a well-studied concept. But as far as how do I know the trustworthiness of these sources, it is unknown, but what we can do is trace these references in order to determine if they're trustworthy or not, if necessary. So let's take a moment to actually dissect the official content for the South Carolina state standards versus the information provided on Wikipedia. And let's just take a real close look at what these sources provided to see how they differ. All right, so let's take a closer look at the rock cycle model provided by the state of South Carolina and the Department of Education. So what this model demonstrates is the processes that rocks can undergo to become different kinds of rocks. And what's interesting about the model provided by the state of South Carolina is that I've never considered it complete. Just one area in particular, like an igneous rock, could be remelted into magma. So an igneous rock could be remelted into magma and then cool again to become a different type of igneous rock. The other interesting thing is even superficial details like spelling here, the way they spelled cooling is not accurate, and that's just some minor details about the information provided by the state of South Carolina that I would not consider to be extremely accurate. So let's compare that to the model provided by Wikipedia. Here's the model that Wikipedia provided, and number 3 here indicates an igneous rock, and what it does show is that an igneous rock could indeed become remelted into magma and then become a different type of igneous rock. So what's interesting about the Wikipedia model is I would consider it to be more accurate. I do believe it includes all of the processes that rocks can undergo, whereas the model provided by the state of South Carolina does not. All right, so let's examine the validity of the references and the trustworthiness of the information provided by the state of South Carolina. So the only thing they provide is this short statement here, which includes a staff at the State Department who we can't necessarily identify, an oversight committee, which again we don't know who these people are or what their credentials are. The people involved in the field review and those sort of details are really untraceable, and what's interesting is that if you compare that to the resources or the references provided by Wikipedia, at the very least, these are traceable. We could do more research and find out how trustworthy these sources are and actually determine the validity of what the information is that they provided if we needed to. So in conclusion, surprisingly, the references supplied by the state of South Carolina, I believe, were more superficial than the references provided by Wikipedia. I also believe that the information provided by the state of South Carolina was also not as accurate as the information provided on Wikipedia. But in order to really determine whether or not Wikipedia is a reliable source of information, some more detailed analyses would need to be conducted.